We are here today for our Iowa Organic Association winter webinar, Soil Health for Organic Farms with Hillary Olson from Iowa NRCS. And so she'll kind of tell a little bit about herself and get us going there in a second. Just a little bit about the Iowa Organic Association. We are a statewide nonprofit organization committed to organic education, advocacy, cooperation, and we have a diverse membership of organic farmers, gardeners, market gardeners, food and farm businesses, related businesses, organizations, advocates, and of course, consumers who are devoted to building a more sustainable Iowa through organic agriculture and organic products in the state of Iowa. So my name is Ethan Book. I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Iowa Organic Association. So in that role, I help put on and organize field days, webinars like this, workshops, and then I also go and do a lot of college visits, high school visits, community organization visits, talking about organic agriculture in the state and options for consumers interested in organics. So that's just a little bit about me. I also farm southeast of Des Moines in Knoxville with raising livestock. So we do have one more winter webinar, although it doesn't feel much like winter anymore, thankfully. But we have one more coming up on March 26th with the Nailers. We're going to talk organic apples and cider production. So you can sign up for that on our website if you're interested in that. Also, you can just search for Iowa Organic Association on YouTube, and you can go back and see any of the other webinars that we've done. A couple weeks back, we had a great one about milking organic dairy using robots. And so that was a great one. We talked row crops in small grains, pastures, all sorts of things on that one. We have grazing cattle with cover crops and annuals, organic systems. We also have marketing. So a lot of great different options for our webinars if you want to go back and check those out. But today's topic is soil health for organic farms. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Hillary.
Thank you, Ethan. So my name's Hillary Olson.
I'm going to say one more thing. I'm not going to turn it over to Hillary. I'm going to say one more thing, and that is we have a Q&A section and a chat section. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in. I promised Hillary that I wouldn't interrupt her, and I did immediately. So go ahead and put your questions either in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we will get to those as we go through or towards the end of it. We'll definitely have time for questions and answers. Now, Hillary.
Perfect. All right, perfect. Thank you, Ethan. So as Ethan mentioned, I work for NRCS. I am the state soil health specialist. So I cover the state. I've worked for NRCS for about 18 years, mostly in the field office as a soil conservationist. My husband and I farm in central Iowa. I grew up on a farrow-to-finish hog operation. We had row crop. My husband and I currently farm. Up until last year, we had about 100 head cow-calf herd. We've since sold the herd, but we are still doing row crop. So I was excited for the opportunity to present today, focusing on soil health in organic systems. So for a lot of you, you might be doing soil health practices already on your operation. So I hope the information that I share with you today will reinforce the actions that you're already doing and maybe encourage you to take some new steps down your soil health journey. If you are new to the soil health practices, maybe this will encourage you to think about the why behind soil health and why it's so important to increase the functions of our soil. Next slide. So today I'm going to be focusing a lot on soil functions and how our management really impacts whether or not that soil is functioning to the best of its ability. I've got a couple of demonstrations I'm going to do. Those include the slate test and infiltration test. I'm also going to cover some of the soil health principles and then some of the practices that that organic producers might focus on in order to adopt some of those principles on their farms. What I'm most excited for is the discussion at the end with Bruce and Caleb. I call them a lot with questions that I have. They are both pushing the envelope on their operations, and so it's fun to see what they're doing and to learn as they go through those steps. So we've got some discussion at the end. They'll be sharing about their operation, and we'll have Q&A. Next slide. This is a question that I always come back to. Why should we care about soil health? And what is it that you have to gain from adding some of these soil health practices to your farm? It might be my personality, but I always want to know why. Why should I be doing something? If I'm going to go to the extra effort of maybe trying to improve my own health, why should I get up early in the morning to work out? Why should I try to limit the number of beers I drink? That information helps me to decide whether the extra effort is worth it. And so today I'm going to be sharing some of those demos that will help illustrate why improving soil function is going to impact the resiliency of your farms. Next slide. The definition of soil health really focuses on highlights the function of the soil and what we can do to improve that capacity of that soil to operate at the best of its ability. Because it's really, at the end of the day, it's what's going to sustain all of us. So if you look at these two pictures on the slide, so we've got two different situations here, but look at the differences. The first thing I notice is the color. One of them is a lot lighter in color. The one on the right is darker, indicating that there's more organic matter and more carbon. Look also at the roots. Look at how much infiltrate or how much those roots on the right are spreading throughout that nicely structured soil. You know that those soils are going to be able to access the entire profile. They're going to be able to access the stored water in the pores, the nutrients, as compared to that soil picture on the left, where you have that one gnarly root sticking out there over on the end. We all put a lot of invest dollars to buy farmland, to rent farmland. We want to make sure that we are accessing all of that soil that we have access to. So what really drives the differences here are how we manage our soil. There's inherent properties of a soil that won't that might not allow you to get to ideal situation, but it will help you to enhance the best that your soil can perform. Next slide. So what I'm going to start with today is the basics, just to make sure we're on the same page. A lot of you have probably been exposed to this, but we'll just quickly cover it here, because an aggregate is really the engine that drives soil function, and a strong aggregate at that. So an aggregate is just the sand, silt, and clay particles that all soils have, how those solid particles are structured in a way that allows the pore space, you can see there in the middle, those pore spaces to stay open. Those channels allow for the water to infiltrate, they allow for air exchange. You can also see that there are some microscopic water films in between some of those particles. That is where our soil microbes live. So this is their habitat. So if we think in terms of hunting, if you want to increase pheasants on your farm, you're going to be looking at seeding maybe some natives and some forbs to increase that habitat and that shelter for those pheasants, in addition to the food source. We're going to talk about how we manage our soil is impacting the habitat and the food source for our soil microbes. And we're going to talk about how important they are. Next slide. So I've been harping on the soil functions, and especially, in terms of soil health, how the way we manage the soil can improve the soil functions. So let's take a second here to think about all the things that we ask the soil to do for us, because I think it's something that's easy to take for granted. So if we have a healthy soil, it can really capture and infiltrate our water. It can also store that water. It seems like we have frequent periods of drought anymore. And so if we have more pore spaces, that water is going to be stored when the plant needs it. Also, when we have a strong, diverse community of microbes, they're going to be able to cycle and recycle the nutrients. Can also help protect those plants from pathogens and stress if they have the resources that they need. There's also been a lot of attention lately on the ability of soil to store carbon. Anytime you can increase organic matter in your fields, that's a win-win situation for you in multiple capacities. And if we are setting ourselves up for a situation where we have strong aggregates, we're going to be able to resist some of the forces of wind and water to carry that away in our runoff and our wind erosion. Next slide. So here's the first demonstration I'm going to cover today. This is a slake test. And so this is the ability of the soil to withstand the forces of water. And so Ethan is going to pull up a quick video here, if it works. Okay. So a lot of you have probably seen this, but this is one of the most powerful tools we have. The power of observation when it comes to our soils really has encouraged a lot of people to go down the soil health path. The soil samples that I have in this demo, they're the same soil. So they're clarion soils. These are central Iowa soils, 92, 95 CSR. So these are some really nice soils. The sample on the left, no-till for 30 years, cover cropped every single year for 15 years. Compared to the sample on the right, where we've got tillage. This is a pretty standard corn bean conventional system in central Iowa. Tillage, spring and fall. We don't have any cover crops growing out there. We did apply a lot of cattle manure. So this is actually one of my farms that my husband and my father-in-law farm, but it still produces a lot of corn. But as I've been in this position for the last 5 years, I've watched some of the functions of the soil that I'll cover that could be improved if we think about incorporating soil health practices. So look at the difference in the water of these samples. Look how cloudy that is on the right. That's because as the soil soaked into those pore spaces, it increased the pressure, the internal pressure in that aggregate, and it blew it apart. So you can see what's left of that aggregate, basically nothing. And so on the left, you can see how nicely that one is holding together. And that's because there's a lot of biological glues that are holding those sand, silt, and clay particles together. And we're going to cover that a little more in depth. And so next, if you can advance to the next slide here. So how do we build that good structure? How do we build strong aggregates? I like to think of it in terms of building a house. So I can gather all the bricks, I can haul a bunch of bricks in, I can start stacking them up. But if I don't have any mortar to hold those bricks together, it really doesn't matter because I need something to hold those bricks up so that I can have a space to live. I need a living room, kitchen, hallways. That's where we live. So think in terms of your soil microbes. That's where they live as well. They live in the spaces in between the soil. And so anything we can do to help maximize that pore space and the stability is going to impact and improve the functions of your soil. Next slide. So there are two things that create those glues. The first thing is exudates from plant roots. That's a $5 word for sugars that are released from the plant roots as a part of photosynthesis. those sugars are released in that root zone to attract microbes. And so you can see that oat seedling on the right, you can see that the soil is sticking to that root as a result of those exudates. And so what that does, those exudates are the #1 food source for our microbes. So they're going to come into the rhizosphere, which is basically the buffet table around those roots. And as they do that, they are eating each other, they are pooping, they're dying, and as they do that, they are releasing plant available nutrients in that root zone. Plants also have the capability to signal different groups of microbes based on the nutrients that they need. And so these different microbes have different jobs. They will supply different nutrients, and so they will respond to that signal. They will come to the root zone and supply those plant available nutrients in that root zone. So the more I've learned in this position is that this is really a very well orchestrated feedback loop. And if we set them up with the tools to succeed, it's going to impact our functions and our ability to grow crops. Next slide. The second source is our biotic glues. And so I'm sure many of you have gone fishing, you've used earthworms, you know how slimy those things are. So as they move through the soil, that slime cements those sand, silt, and clay particles together, leaving behind those earthworm channels. So our biology, our bacteria, our fungi are similar. They are also sticky, as shown in that microscopic picture on the right. That is a fungi picture, and so you can see that you can see some of the droplets on there, so it's sticky as well. And if left undisturbed, that thing will stretch through the soil. Those make connections with our plant roots and extend through the soil. They are able to access tiny pores that our plant roots can, and so they are able to get at the nutrients and the water that's stored in those micropores. And so all of this working together as a system really works to improve the health of your farm. Next slide. Okay, so here's my next demo. I think Ethan's going to work on pulling up the video. Okay, so we saw that slate demo. We saw that one of the samples completely fell apart. So my next question is always, okay, well, so what? All right, so I've got samples from those same 2 farms. It's just loose soil in there. I've got, at the top, there's a couple of containers that have holes in the bottom. I put the same amount of water in the top. So what we're seeing is it raining on the surface. So I don't know if you can tell, but on the right, you can see that water is ponding up on that surface. That's because those sand, silt, and clay particles, because there wasn't enough glue, they fell apart and they separated, creating a surface seal. A lot of times we'll get that crusting in the spring after we've planted. That's similar. So those particles, if they're not strong enough to hold together, they're going to fall apart, create that seal, and that's what creates a ponding situation. Next slide. So here's a real world example. This was taken from a friend of mine up in Northeast Iowa. So there's a fence row right down the middle of that farm. On the left, we see standing corn stalks, so no-till situation, versus over on the right where it's bare soil. And you can see how much water is standing from that recent rainstorm on that farm that didn't have any soil cover, any residue protection covering that soil surface. Those particles are disintegrating, or the aggregates are falling apart and creating that surface seal. And so that's what's creating this situation here. If you can advance that slide, Ethan. So here's a diagram. So this is what it looks like. Those particles are holding together when we have enough glue, and they keep those pore spaces open, letting that water infiltrate. Over on the right, you've got that surface seal, and that's what's creating the conditions to exacerbate runoff. Next slide. So here's a microscope picture of what it looks like below the surface. These are the same soil types at 2 inches deep. So a retired geologist took some soil samples, filled it with resin, took an extremely thin slice of each section and put it under a microscope. So you can see the pore space that's available in our soils. So we've got conventional tillage without any covers. You can see that there's not much. The lighter areas are the pores. You can see that there's not a whole lot of available pore space. Compared to the picture on the right, I want you to focus especially on that big pore space there towards the middle, and then the root channels that are left open. And so that's really going to allow, again, create that habitat for the soil microbes that you are asking to perform 80% of the soil functions. They are your underground workforce. They're working 24/7. And if you, again, as I've said, if you give them the tools to do their job, they are going to perform for you. Next slide. So what happens when, again, those aggregates aren't strong and those particles are easier to move with wind and water? So the pictures I got on either end are from Northwest Iowa. Those are recent pictures. So that was a conventional farm there. They had tried to seed alfalfa. It was the seeding didn't take off. And so they've been getting a lot of strong winds up there. And so it carried, I think it's about 2 feet of soil over there. So the picture on the right is an organic system. So you can see in both of those systems, there's not any residue protecting the soil surface from those forces of wind. And the picture in the middle, also not much residue out there. And so we're getting that concentrated runoff. So one thing to keep in mind, that moving soil is not productive soil. Our microbes are concentrated in the top 2 inches of the soil. Think of all of the topsoil, your nutrients that you're losing when your soil moves off your field. Next slide. So here's a picture of some of the critters that are in those top 2 inches. So we talked a little bit about those plant root exudates. That's what's driving the system, those carbons, the liquid carbon, the sugars. That's what's making the system go, because that's the fuel source for our microbes. So we've got bacteria, fungi, the protozoa and the nematodes, earthworms. They're all working together in the soil food web. And as they are doing so, they are building those aggregates. They are cycling and recycling your nutrients for your plants. And so trying to think in terms of what you're doing for your management practices and how is that impacting the underground soil life is going to help you make decisions in the future. Next slide. Okay, so here we're going to start talking about some of the practices and the principles. This wheel has 4 principles. In some conversations, there's some groups that have 4, 5, or 6 principles. So in Iowa NRCS has chosen to leave livestock as a separate principle. In this particular diagram, they've lumped livestock in with biodiversity. One's not saying that one's more important than the other. It's just, I'm just explaining some background. There's also, in industry, there is the addition of the 6th principle, which is context. That's something that I'm always thinking about as I'm having conversations with farmers, because what works for one person isn't going to work for their neighbor. There are potential restrictions of labor, equipment, economical considerations to keep in mind. And so as I'm talking about all of this stuff, just keep in mind that the context of your farm, think about, if you're already doing practices, are there things that you could be doing to increase something in that same practice, or are there additional things that you could be incorporating? We'll elaborate on this a little bit moving forward. But if you can advance the slide, Ethan. On the right, there are, so minimizing disturbance. So we're talking about physical, chemical, and biological disturbance. So anytime we pull an implement through the soil, That's going to break up those aggregates and expose those microbes and that carbon to loss, I guess, organic matter loss. So that's just something to consider. You could think about disturbance in terms of tillage, like you could either reduce the intensity of that tillage pass, maybe you could reduce the frequency of that tillage. So I know that in organic systems, we use tillage a lot for weed control. And so those are just things to think about. That soil cover on the soil surface, if we're thinking about our microbes, that's kind of like their roof. And so a raindrop hits the soil surface at 20 miles an hour. And so anytime we can add additional protection on that soil surface, that's going to help protect them. It's going to help keep those aggregates together. It also improves or helps with the fluctuation in temperatures, because I've been out on soils where we're getting 130-degree soil surface temps. And so at that temperature, your soil biology, they can't survive that. And so that's something else to consider. So on the right, we're protecting the habitat. On the left, we are switching and thinking about principles that are going to feed and fuel our soil biology. So I've been harping on their food source being the exudates from those living roots. And so anytime we can incorporate crops, either cover crops or extended rotations that have a living root growing longer, that means that food source is going to be available longer. If we can incorporate livestock or a diverse cover crop mix, or organic farmers are great at incorporating different crops of that extended rotation. That is going to allow different exudates. Each plant has a unique set of exudates. And so the more diversity that you have means that there's going to be a bigger buffet table of food available for your microbes. Those microbe communities also have unique jobs. And so if you can feed a greater diversity of the microbes, you're going to have more diverse microbes able to do more jobs for you. And so this is, again, it goes back to that feedback loop that the way we manage our soils is going to impact the functions. Next slide. So think of this in terms of a baseline and where you want to go. It's always good to have a goal in mind, especially if you're thinking about incorporating some new practices. I'll use cover crops as an example. You will set yourself up for success if you think about what your end goal is. So not just, yeah, I want to do cover crops. I've heard that they can help, but what is it specifically that you want to target on your farm? Because that would help you decide which species that you want to seed. So in looking at these different indicators of soil health, if we can incorporate more of the practices that follow those soil health principles, we are going to move the needle with all of these different indicators. Some of them might respond slower than others. Organic matter is a good example of that. That's one of the slower ones. If you were to take a soil test, that moves a little bit slower than maybe something like water infiltration. As I've worked with farmers across the state, I usually ask them, especially if they're new to incorporating soil health practices, what was the thing that you noticed first? They say that they noticed that there was less ponding and that their water soaked in faster. So that's something that responds quicker than some of these other indicators. But they're all important functions. And so if you can stay committed, if you can network with farmers like Caleb and Bruce that are doing things on their farms, that when you hit those obstacles to help you overcome those, that's when I think that we can start pushing that needle. So just remember, this is going to be a journey along the way, and there really is not a destination. Next slide. A lot of you have already been exposed to some of these components of soil health. So thinking about feeding the soil and those microbes, as opposed to just thinking about the fertilizers that we're applying, especially with the synthetic fertilizers, in terms of probably more traditional or conventional row crops. Thinking in those terms to diversifying your row crop rotations, planting those cover crops, adding that livestock component. I know a lot of fences have been removed across Iowa, so that's a challenge. But anytime you can do things like this is going to increase your resiliency in your fields. Next slide. So what are some of the practices that fit into these different soil health principles? Caleb and I had a conversation about how they're working on corn, bean, rolling down rye in order to help with some of that weed control during that soybean year. So if we can, not completely eliminate tillage, but maybe again, we're extending that frequency between our tillage passes. If we can incorporate a perennial, incorporate the pasture into that setting, then you're going to have positive impacts. There's also other options, other tools available out there in addition to tillage. Next slide. Keeping that soil covered is really important, that roof for our soil microbes. Again, that helps protect with the raindrop impact and those temperature extremes. So if we can add perennials, those small grains or cover crops, if we can use a variety of different crops, that's going to help with those different food sources. And so that's going to help increase the diversity of your soil microbes. Next slide. And then anytime we can increase a biodiversity is a win. Again, because each of those different crops have those different exudates, but also they have different root architecture. And so that can help reach different depths of the soil that maybe previous plants couldn't. And so that is also going to be a benefit if you can add compost, manure, some of these different amendments. That's also a way that you could incorporate some of that livestock and biodiversity impact on your fields or your operation if having grazing animals out there is not an option. On the right is a resource from SARE to help you think through some of those options. Next slide. Okay, so now the fun part, we get to talk to Caleb and Bruce. So Caleb started farming with his business partner Noah in 2006 there around the Cambridge area. So Story County, they produce organic corn, beans, sunflowers. We were just talking about some of the interesting things, a lot of people stopping along the road outside of Ankeny to take pictures by these sunflowers. So some of the unintended consequences of incorporating different crops. So he's going to talk about some of that. And then I've got Bruce Carney also on here. Bruce, and that's the next slide. Ethan, I've got Bruce's family farm. So Bruce farms near Maxwell, not too far from Caleb. So they are raising forage finished beef. And so Bruce has, he's transitioning some of his paddocks to warm season native. So it's been fun to work with Bruce going through that. He's been doing some soil health testing. So he's also incorporating silvopasture. Bruce is always, like I said, these two are always pushing the envelope. So I've got a few questions for both of them. So I guess Caleb, we'll start with you. If you could highlight some of the practices that you're implementing, why you decided to go down this path, and then I guess we'll start there.
As we started into the organic business, as far as soil health went, we stopped using commercial fertilizers and herbicides, which helps, but you still have to control weeds. So tillage has been a huge issue for us. We tried to reduce tillage in season, and we've had trouble with that. So say take corn, for example, trying to make less passes with a cultivator. We've had troubles with that. So we kind of took a different approach to it and try and no-till our soybeans into rye cover crop and roller crimp it. We grow wheat or another small grain, which is much less tillage. So rather than trying to, for example, reduce our tillage 25% every year, we try and go no-till on 1 or 2 out of 4 year rotation, kind of a different approach to still have our cash crop be able to make it go. When we are running full tillage, say on corn or sunflowers, we try to seed our cover crops much earlier than after harvest. We have a row crop air seeder we can pull behind the row crop cultivators. So on our last pass, we can seed cover crops and try and get them growing, say early July. They do have trouble with the corn and sunflower canopy, but at least there's something they're trying to get started. The other thing we've run into is if you have a very nice cover crop and you need to get that work down to go to a cash crop, say come spring, how do you handle that level of biomass? We've tried many different things, from as simple as disking it and trying to field cultivate through it, which has problems because you bring a lot of that biomass back up. We've tried high-speed discs, several different brands, trying to make it a one pass from cover crop to cash crop. That way that you don't have to leave it tilled over the winter. Last year we set up a moldboard plow that pulled a packer behind it. And I know moldboard plows have a bad reputation on the soil health side, but it did allow us to take a cover crop that was huge, green, lush, being grazed waist high, and we plowed it down, and with a packer right behind it, we were able to knock off enough clods and get it smooth enough we were able to plant directly into that. So essentially in 24 hours, we were able to go from a huge cover crop to a planted corn crop. And then being able to seed cover crops with a cultivator come July, it just shortened that window of having open soil. We got a neighbor that has a highboy air seeder. We hire him. If we don't get it on with a cultivator, he can put cover crop on when the crop is even taller than that. So yeah, it's getting from a cover crop to a cash crop is a challenge, and then making sure that you can handle the weeds after that. The other part is matching your cover crops up to what your cash crops are going to be. So, rye doesn't get along with corn very well. So you want to be able to try and run a heavier legume mix or an oat crop ahead of a corn crop if you're going to do a spring cover. So it's a lot of tricks trying to just get the cover crop to line up with what your cash crop is trying to do as quickly as possible. Grazing. The other part about cover crops is, you got some money in them for cost of seed, cost of application. So how do you try and recoup some of that cost more than just soil health? And grazing is a very good one. We don't have a cow-calf operation. Some of the neighbors bring their cattle over if it fits to graze it. If we were better at making money with a cow-calf operation, I think we would probably go to a cover crop that would maybe last 2 to 3 years, so you could graze it for that full 2 to 3 years on one seeding, and then go back to cash crop of whatever sort. We just haven't gotten into the livestock side of it. So trying to reduce tillage is obviously a goal. Trying to increase plants growing is the goal, and it's just how do you work through all that mechanically and timing wise to get all of it to fit together.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of it's like the worst game of chess.
Yeah, and you change one thing and
2 or 3
it
steps
changes
ahead.
something else, right? So like
Yeah.
one problem we're working on today is last year we had a lot of ground that we roller crimped rye down, put beans on, and harvested the beans and spread chicken litter on it. And now we have to get that set up to go to corn. Right now it's got a, pretty good cover of rye stubble still on it, some bean stubble, and then some volunteer cover crops that have come up from having been no-tilled and some that we seeded on over the summer. But that has to go to corn, so now we're dealing with rye stubble and a menagerie of random cover crops. So, I mean, over the winter it was great. There's no erosion, wind or rain. It took the water real well, but now it has to go to corn. So we have to get that rye worked under, which probably, if it gets dry enough, we'll probably just disc it and then field cultivate it out of the planter. If it turns wet and drags us out a little bit, it's going to become a different conversation.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that case, some of the farms did get discs in the fall so they can just get field cultivated in the spring and go, but some of them did not. So it's kind of hedge our bet a little bit. So we didn't have everything needing spring work.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 And everything's a tool in the toolbox. And I like how you guys are trying different things and seeing what works, and what works one year probably might not necessarily work the next, I guess, depending on weather. And so I like how you guys are approaching that. Bruce, do you want to talk about some of the things that you're implementing on your farm?
Sure. I guess right now the things that I can think about I'm implementing right now is transitioning some cool season pastures, perennial pastures to warm season perennial pastures, just to diversify the forage out there, plus get me through the hot weather during the summer. I'll have a warm season annual there that's ready to graze when my cool seasons are shutting down. The other thing, I got an equip contract with NRCS that I'm interseeding legumes and broadleaves in my cool season perennial pastures, which I think what that's doing is giving me more diversity, trying to put plants that I don't have out there into the soil to help with my soil health in that way. I don't know. The other one, I guess I'm looking a lot at agroforestry, planting some trees, thinking about silvopasture, which will help keep the soil cooler in the hot temperatures. It'll keep my cool season perennials growing longer during those hot months. It'll give the cattle a more comfortable place to be. I think there's a lot of benefits to trees. Down the road, years after my life, somebody could harvest some lumber off of it. You could go into some nut production. There's a lot of different things that could go along with that as well. Your question about how did I get started with organic and soil health, and I guess that takes me back a long ways to when my dad died in 1996, and that's when I come back out here to the farm. And there was 200 acres of crop ground and 100 acres of pasture, and there was cattle on the farm. So, but if you think back there, you get into the, time when they were starting to talk about let's either get big or get out, and getting big didn't interest me, and getting out didn't interest me much either. So my thought was to specialize in something a little different than what I was. I didn't like all the chemicals I was using. I didn't like all the fertilizers and the commercial fertilizers and nitrogen and everything seemed to be against soil health. So my choice was to seed the whole farm down to perennials. By doing that, you put a living root in the soil year round. You put, or a lot longer. You put, you quit using fertilizers. You quit using the chemicals that you did. So a lot of the soil health principles just come along with the perennial pastures, and the livestock is the one that seems to be the hardest to get back on the farm today. I think Caleb kind of talked about that a little bit. He'd like to get more into that. Him and I have talked a lot about it, but it's, we've spent a lot of time tearing all the infrastructure out and now we want it back. So, but the reason why I got there was just to eliminate a lot of cost. Costs were growing. It was costing more to put a crop in the ground, and I like the livestock part of it. So I guess the soil health part just led me down that path. That's where I went.
So what's been one of the biggest challenges that you've faced?
Well, I think when I started was, well, you still got to have an income off of it. And so as I was transitioning and everything, basically my income become hay. I planted a lot of alfalfa and I baled a lot of hay, and my income become a hay crop off of that as I was building more livestock on the farm at the same time. The more you seed down, the more mouths you got to feed, the more material you got to put through a cow, and so it takes time to build that herd and do all that. So basically, my transition was through hay and annuals and cover crops, and I'd use cover crops in standing corn and grazed them while I was growing corn and soybeans out here. I'd put them on with an airplane and used them for years. So I think that's the biggest obstacle. Is where's the income going to come from if you don't plant crops?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then farther down the road, when I was still doing little corn, 2008 was the last year I planted any corn, and I always fed grain-fed beef and sold beef direct from the farm. So the other piece of that was getting into forage finished beef and selling that direct from the farm. Well, and we was selling, so we had a customer line out there, but it was for grain-fed beef, and they're different customers. So then you got to start building your whole customer base on forage finished beef and coming into that part of it too. So and then I think in there somewhere corn got to $5 a bushel, and I wasn't going to buy corn to feed cows for $5. So that was a big incentive for me just to figure out the forage finished beef part and move down that road. And I guess another obstacle was just the marketing piece of what we was selling from the farm was conventional beef and forage finished beef are two different animals. You got to have the right type of animal. You got to do all that. And I'm getting a little bit off of soil health. So I think I'll just stop there. But
I think it's an excellent point. There's lots of things you have to consider, not just soil health when you're going down this path. So you raised some really good points, Bruce. Caleb, what are some of the obstacles that you mentioned? A few, but what's something that comes to mind with that question for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you come up with a plan and envision how it can go, and you can't buy that machine that'll do it, you got to be able to come up with it on your own. Take the annual seed cover crops between a cash crop. You got to have a planter that seeds on the tractor track rather than off the tractor track. So you can't just use your regular planter, and it's probably got to be 3 points so that it is on a toolbar that you can raise it up and over. So using the row crop cultivator was a pretty simple solution. You just had to get seed delivered to it. So we had to build an air seeder that would fit down the rows and follow the machine and be able to blow the seed up behind it. So some simple stuff like that. But like Bruce is saying on the livestock side, it's not just buying a cow and building a fence and hauling water. You got to be able to sell it at a profit to, if on the livestock side, if you're competing against Nebraska or Wyoming grass, their land cost is very different than ours is. So how do you get that all to make enough money to cover your underlying cost? And land is obviously a high percentage of that.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to somebody that maybe hasn't started down the soil health path? Where would you tell them to start?
Well, I mean, just for a simple row cropper, adding cover crops is a simple way to start. You can hire it done. You can do it after harvest. You can do it before harvest. There's a lot of options there. And then just coming up, making sure your cover crop matches to your cash crop. So if you did oats and clover into soybeans, that would set you up to go to corn. And then rye was something else to go to soybeans, say. And that would go for organic or commercial.
Sure.
No crop or no till in soybeans and rye. I mean, it sounds good, it sounds easy, but if there's not enough biomass of rye there to hold the weeds for the season, you're going to run yourself into a pretty big problem. There's almost nothing there's very few things you can do to control weeds without tillage. So, we have a weed zapper that helps a lot. You can hire bean walkers, which is relatively expensive, but that helps too. So I don't know. It's just, and then if you get a rye crop that's not good enough to make it for the season, what are you going to do when you're ready to plant soybeans? Are you going to bail it all off, or you're going to try and work it all down, or how do you adjust very quickly? So having a deep toolbox does help.
Yeah.
So
Maybe-
just for advice, just get started and see where it brings you. It's gonna help your soil health, so you just have to stay on it.
Yeah. Okay. Bruce, what advice would you give to others?
Well, I'd add a little bit more just right on to where Caleb was going with the cover crops. And if you don't own livestock, maybe your neighbor does, have a conversation with him and see if you can extend his season or get his cattle off his pasture when he wants to do some interseeding or doing something like that would work for both of you, that could help your row crop neighbor out and help the cattle producer out at the same time. Just team up with somebody if you don't have the livestock at the time or don't want to be in the livestock business. But I guess that's one. My advice, I guess, and as far as, again, I don't know how much it relates to soil health. It kind of does, but if you're going to sell forage finished beef like I am, you got to make a decision, because conventional agriculture and forage finished beef are two different things. It's two different types of animals, and you need to just make the decision what you're going to do and get the right type of animal. And otherwise, you're just not going to ever get there. You can't get these big framed animals finished. Some of the things I've noticed along to measure my soil health would be, when I started this, it was 30 months, probably at the least, to finish an animal on forage. And I'm not sure it was finished then. And today I'm down, closer to plus or minus 24 months to finish an animal on forage. And that all relates back to, I think, the diversity of forage, the grazing techniques you use, whether it's rotational grazing, strip grazing, high stock density grazing. These are all tools in my toolbox that go out there, annuals in there, during the summer months to finish beef on are a lot better than a cool season pasture. There's, a lot of pasture walks I went to when I was coming up was put on by Iowa State, and all they wanted to talk about was going out and spraying your pastures and killing all the weeds. You get more grass. Well, they don't ever want to talk about all the legumes that they killed when they killed all the weeds. And to me, it's not a weed on my farm unless it's there for a year and a cow hasn't ate it. And there's very few of them that they don't eat. So I think diversity is huge in your pastures. You're going to have a very hard time, I think, finishing beef on monocultures.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in, Hillary, and see if we can get some time for questions, because I think there's some questions for all three of you. But I want to be conscious of everyone's time. And I also, before we get to the questions, I want to apologize. I did not realize 4 months ago when we scheduled this that the Cyclones would be playing right now. But they're winning 47-40. So there you go. There's your Iowa State update if you needed it. Just a couple questions that came in. If you have a question, either you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them. But the first question, just kind of a general question. Can you spread manure, put manure on top of a cover crop? Is that a problem or concern?
No, that's probably a great way to do it.
Yep, agreed. This one may be more for you, Hillary. I was curious to hear your thoughts on cation balancing for soil health. Many farmers seem to be big believers, and NRCS supports it through CPS 333, gypsum for non-sodic soils. We are well into, this is editorial here, well into words that I don't necessarily know how to pronounce. Land grant research doesn't show a benefit to cation balancing and says gypsum will only help soil condition on sodic soils or where Ca or S are below sufficiency, regardless of ratios. Hillary, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's been something I've been curious about as well. So Iowa NRCS does not, we don't have that gypsum practice offered currently. But in terms of aggregate stability, the calcium magnesium ratios are important. So if you're having issues and things aren't going like you should, that might be something that we could look at. Ethan, I might need to do some more homework on this question. Is there a way that we can communicate answers with more information?
Absolutely, yeah.
Later on that?
Just want to send me anything that you kind of come up with or thoughts on this. I'll send it back out when we send kind of a summary of the webinar. That would be great.
Yeah, but yeah, I know there's definitely some proponents of gypsum, and having that balance out there, I think is something that definitely needs to be considered.
Yep. And I love good, thoughtful answers to good questions. So that's good. Another one, this one's probably for you, Bruce, and Hillary can chime in, but what do you do to improve the fertility of your permanent pastures?
Well, I did exactly what they tell you not to do, and that's just cut all your utility off at once and don't put any more on. That's how I did it. When I quit row crop, I quit putting fertilizer on. To me, a cow is a recycler, number one. I just think 90% of what goes in the front of that cow comes out the back of that cow in a more usable form for your pasture, by the way. Adds organic matter. There's a lot of things there. But my biggest import of nutrients to this farm has always been I try to bale hay off the farm and bring hay to the farm. And my livestock is out on the land. I move it around every year. All their feed gets fed to them out on the farm, not in a lot. I haul. I do for grain finish a few beef yet that are in a lot, but other than that, all my animals are out on the land all year long, all through the winter. That's why I've planted all the trees for windbreaks and things like that too. But my fertility comes from hauling hay to the farm or annuals or whatever.
And the different forms of grazing that you talked about, I'm sure rotational or mob grazing, high density, stock density.
Yeah, all those things, are different ways to manipulate your soil and your soil health and the plants to do different things. But, what I guess still only 90% of what goes in a cow comes out the back of the cow. But you can make it more dense or more spread out by the type of grazing you could do, right? If you're high stock density grazing, you're going to get a better spread of your manure and urine. Yeah.
Awesome. This is kind of an interesting one. Caleb, Bruce, if a person accepts the idea that there are two different ways to do the economics of farming, one being trying to make more than you spend and the other spending less than you make, where do you guys kind of come down on that? Are you trying to make more than you spend, or are you trying to spend less?
Yes, that's what I'm doing. Been on both sides of that.
And where
Yeah.
does soil health come into that?
Well, I think for me, just having livestock has done so much for this farm as far as soil health. Just recycling and feeding cows out, bale grazing, and unrolling hay out on the farm and doing all that. It's just been, I don't know. Now I kind of even the question went clear over my head. But what was the question again?
Are you, well, I was just thinking, building our soil health is something that we can do that will decrease our inputs, which will be the doing things, more economically than spending more, just, trying to spend as much money as possible to make more than we spent, kind of a thing. So,
Yeah. Well, just transition
Profit.
perennial forages for me
Yeah.
cut a lot of expense out of mine. But I still had to figure out how to make that income back too as well, because the income wasn't there either. So yeah, it was both. It was hard on both sides, but now I got a pretty balanced system here. I think of hauling in the hay and doing it that way, and got a pretty good market set up for my product going out as well.
Yeah. Caleb, any closing thoughts?
Well, I mean, soil health is not a year-to-year thing, and your cash flow with your financial people is a year-to-year thing. So trying to balance those two things, because it costs a little money to make your soil health better, and in the long run, it'll make the farm essentially worth more in the operator's eyes. So it's how do you increase soil health and do the right thing while you're still making your year-to-year thing work right?
Sure, sure. Hillary, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, we don't want anybody to soil health their way out of business. Again, it goes back to terms of context and what works for your operation, and having an end goal in mind, and making well thought out steps, I guess, and having plans B, C, and D when maybe plan A doesn't come to fruition. But I just want to say thank you again for Caleb and Bruce for joining, because I really think farmers learn best from other farmers. And so I just really appreciate you guys taking the time to join today and share your experiences.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'd like to
absolutely.
say thank you too for just the opportunity for us to come on and share with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Hillary and Caleb and Bruce. I really appreciate it. It was an amazing webinar.